Hello world, my name is Tim Ruswick, and today I want to talk about perfectionism, what it is, how you can overcome it, and why it gets in your way sometimes. I know a lot of people think that perfectionism is something that's good. I get a lot of comments on, especially with my methodology of quantity over quality and how great stuff comes from making a lot of bad stuff. And every once in a while I get comments like, hey, you should strive to make the perfect indie game, and if it takes you 10 years, then you should do that, and you should do everything you can to make the... listen, okay, let me just tell you, from a creative person, from a person that has a community of thousands of game developers from all over the planet, and I play Feedback Friday once a month, every Friday on Twitch. I play hundreds of indie games. I connect with thousands of developers all along the globe. Let me tell you, perfectionism is not a good thing. It's not a good thing. It sounds like it is. You want to make the perfect thing. You want to take all the time in the world to make the perfect thing, but it gets in your way. I'm going to tell you three primary ways, or things rather, that can help you along your journey to get rid of perfectionism, because in reality, perfectionism is not a thing to strive for. Perfectionism is an imaginary goal that you can never reach. Perfection doesn't exist. And in a perfect world, we would make perfect products, but this is not a perfect world. We have all kinds of crazy, random things that happen, and just interactions and crazy stuff that like we don't plan for, and we have to be prepared for it. So if you want to make a game, or any creative project really, and you want to get it out there, you actually want to finish it, you got to get rid of some of the perfectionism. So number one, you have to stop looking at perfectionism as good. It's not a good thing. It may seem like it is. In a perfect world, it may seem like, hey, I want to make the perfect thing. And that's one of those things that, like, we watch movies about, and it's like, oh, the dude spent his entire life making the perfect piece of art. And it's kind of one of those like romantic, beautiful stories of how someone gave up their entire life for the perfect piece of art. But in reality, that's not real, right? That's not a real thing. It's a cool story, but it's not. In reality, that dude could have made a way better thing if he made 1,000 pieces and then made the perfect piece, or tried to make the perfect piece, right? After making 1,000 pieces, because you learn a lot of stuff. You learn so much stuff along the way. Perfectionism is living in a constant simulation in the future. It's not real. It's thinking that you can get somewhere that you can't get. And honestly, it runs in hand with workaholism. And workaholism is the most socially accepted form of addiction. And culturally, at least in the United States, it is one of those things that people pat you on the back for. Oh yeah, you work 16 hours today? Oh, you're on the grind, man. You're doing it good. And then ironically, we get mad at AAA companies for crunch time and forcing employees to work 16 hours a day. But culturally, like, it's something that people brag about. Yep, I work 16 hours today. Yeah, like, especially entrepreneur, that whole subsect of people. But it's not a good thing, because there are diminishing returns with work hours the same way there are with perfectionism, right? Let's say you want to make the perfect game mechanic or whatever. You spend, let's say, 10 units of time, whatever, 10 hours, 10 days, whatever it takes to make the perfect thing. 10 units of time, and you get 10 units of productivity, right? You spend the next 10 units of time, you don't get the same out of it. Same thing with perfectionism. You can tweak something endlessly, right? A mechanic, an art piece, a song, whatever you're making, you can tweak it, but the more time you spend, at some point there's going to become diminishing returns. You're not going to get the same out of it. And that's why perfectionism is toxic, because it makes sense in the beginning to spend a lot of time on the thing, right? I shouldn't say perfecting the thing in a video about that's against perfectionism, but you're making it great, right? And then at some point there just comes a time where you put in the same amount of time and you don't get the same result. And I happen to subscribe to the idea of like 90% perfection. Like, if it's 90%, it's good enough. Which leads me to number two, going with good enough. And this is something I get a lot of pushback on, because I posted videos about perfectionism in the past. I posted videos about quantity over quality, and my whole philosophy on creative works, and how it really does help to just push out a bunch of shit to get better at making a thing. Like, if you focus on making a bunch of bad things, that's your goal, to make a bunch of bad things, you get better. Just you can't not get better by doing a thing over and over again, right? So my whole philosophy is quality is not better than quantity. Quality comes from quantity. The more you make, the better you are at the thing. So going with good enough is one of those things where you have to, that's basically the skill of identifying the line where there are diminishing returns, and the diminishing returns are not worth it. So for example, 10 units of time equals 10 units of productivity. The next 10 units of time equals 5 units of productivity. The next 10 units of time equals 2 units of productivity, right? At that point, it's probably like, hey, this is good enough, you know? Like, can we squeeze more out of this? Yeah. But it's no longer worth the time you're putting into it, especially for little details that like nobody's going to notice. And don't get me wrong, there, like, you can put stuff in a game, little tiny details, attention to detail, like, you know, add cool little story elements and all that stuff. I'm not saying you shouldn't add that stuff, but I'm saying that, like, at some point those things are not as valuable as the time that you're spending on them. And especially like in a commercial project, those things can kill you. Commercially, they can kill your business because you have spent so much time on subtle details that nobody will notice, and you could have been shipping a game, right? You could have been getting the thing done. You could have been working on the things that are not done yet, because that's another thing that perfectionists do, myself included. I'm not out of this. They actually try and perfect things that don't really matter yet. They try and perfect the little details of a level design when they don't have the options menu and the settings menu and the tutorial and all the stuff that they need for someone to play the game to give them feedback on it, right? They spend so much time on the game. I actually play a lot of games that in Feedback Friday, especially, that don't have a coherent experience done. And granted, in the beginning, that's, you know, that's normal to have just the game and not any kind of onboarding or any kind of tutorial or any kind of thing that teaches the game. But a lot of people, they get feedback when their game is not in a learnable state, right? It doesn't give the player any feedback on what they're doing. It doesn't tell them any of the controls. It doesn't explain anything. And they drop them in this world. And then they get feedback that, hey, this game is confusing, or I don't like this game, right? And to them, that's like, shit, I guess I gotta quit because people don't like my game. But in reality, that's not the real problem. The real problem is there's no way for the player to learn the problem. And perfectionism is especially creating of that. That's not even a sentence. Perfectionism creates that problem a lot of times because people can get hyper focused on little things. Like, for example, if you are a very mechanical brain, if you like card games and if you like strategy games and these number calculations and the balance aspect of it, I've seen people go so hard on the balance and the numbers and the tweaking of like an RTS game that they forget all of the little details. They forget to tell me when I successfully hit a unit, right? With a sound effect or with some kind of visual effect. They forget to tell me, when I get hit. I didn't even notice I died because there's no like player feedback, but they have focused to hell. They have perfected the balance of the game, right? And that's what I mean, is like perfectionism can give you those blinders, and it can, especially for people that are prone to that sort of thing, like hyper obsessive or super like one-tracked, where they like focus in on things. That perfectionism can be a major barrier to getting other things done, and it can get in the way. And I know for me, like too, especially the perfectionism a lot of times stems from a fear of being wrong. Like you don't want to be wrong, right? So you want to make sure that it's right. But the problem is, being wrong is not only okay, But being wrong in a creative field can actually be the preferred option because crazy things happen when you're wrong. You know how many features in Cyberpunk especially are results of people reading things wrong, or me designing something a certain way and people thought it was different, and then I just kind of adapt what they thought it was, or putting something out there that didn't work at all, but then having an insight based on how people react to that on what a better mechanic was, right? So like when you have perfectionism, a lot of people think they know what the perfect thing is, and they're not right. They don't know a lot of the times, because honestly, in creative fields, there is no right thing. There can be two completely different, completely crazy valid options at the same time. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, option A is right and option B is wrong. That's not true. Option A is different than option B, but they can both still be viable, especially in game design. It's crazy how that works out. And some people can love option A and some people can love option B. At the end of the day, you got to pick one. And if you're a perfectionist and you want the perfect thing and you're looking for the perfect thing, and honestly, if you think the perfect thing exists when it doesn't, you're going to have a hard time making any decisions at all, right? Good enough does not equal garbage. I have that highlighted in a bullet list. I want to make sure that I iterate that, because a lot of people, that's the comments I get when I talk about this, quantity over quality. Like, oh, well, we don't need no more shit games on Steam. Okay, stop advocating that people make shit games. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm not advocating that you make shit games as a business model. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying, oh, you should make asset flips and fucking mobile games, shitty mobile game clones. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying creatively, if you want to move your creative skill forward, the best way to do it is to make shit stuff and make a quantity of shit stuff. And the reason why I say shit stuff, by the way, because this comes from I think it was Tim Ferriss, who said that he writes 2 crappy pages a day for finishing his book. I forget where I read that, but that resonated with me so much, because the idea is not to produce bad shit. The idea is to remove the barrier in your head that prevents you from doing anything at all if you can't do it perfect, right? So when I was deep in my perfectionism, I think I've gotten better with it, but it still plagues me sometimes. A lot of times I would have this idea for this epic thing, right? This happened with Phylophobia. I wanted to make the original version of Phylophobia had 8 endings and all these kinds of abilities and all kinds of crazy stuff. And I wanted to make the perfect thing. And I spent so much time trying to make the perfect thing and then failing that it was very discouraging. But if I had started with the objective of getting the thing done, right? Not making the perfect thing intentionally, that 2 crappy pages a day. What if I did, 200 crappy lines of code a day, right? Not making the perfect code, not writing the perfect functions that, are reusable and modular, and they have all the parameters and they build the whole. No, what if I hard coded my variables and did the fucked up shit and got it all working, right? What if I did 200 crappy lines of code a day? Could I make more progress that way? And the answer for most people is yes, because a lot of times that perfectionism gets in the way of their ability to even finish things, especially finish things, but even move forward with things, right? And it did for me, right? I think there's a thing called the hypothesis test where you strategically try to half-ass it and you put the thing out there before it's ready. And then you see if the world falls apart, right? Because that's the theory, right? That's the thesis of perfectionists, is like, oh, if people see it like this, if they see it in its imperfect state, they're going to hate me. They're going to hate it, right? There's a fear there. That's what perfectionism is. It's a fear of rejection deep down. And what if you tried it? What if you tried to half-ass it on purpose and you put it out and you got feedback on it? Just whatever. Like, of course people are gonna like react and hate you, and they're gonna start pitchforks, and they're gonna show up at your door, right? And then like the president's gonna tweet it, and it's gonna get crazy, right? And everybody's just gonna hate you. The whole world's gonna hate you for putting out this half-ass thing, right? That's totally what's gonna happen. But what if you try it? What if you try it and the world doesn't fall apart? What if you try it and people actually like it is, right? What if? Would that change the way that you look at things? Would it maybe say, okay, maybe there's some more important things than spending triple the time on this thing that nobody even notices that is broken, even though you see it as broken, right? Because game dev is weird like that. Different people have different things that they like, and something that you hate and something that you can see as unfinished, other people can find fun and engaging. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try to make a good thing. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you don't always know what better means. You don't always know what perfect means. So striving for perfect when you don't know what perfect means, perfect may not even exist, can be a mistake because you're just spinning your wheels, right? Another thing that I do is I challenge my thoughts when they come up. So when I think, oh, I made this thing, it needs way more work. It's got to be perfect, right? Like I need to do this thing. I challenge my thoughts and I ask the opposite. Does this matter? Do I need control here? Do I, just like the hypothesis test, what happens if I release it like this? What if things don't work out? What if I don't have the time to do this thing? I challenge that perfectionism every time it comes up. Every time I'm like, oh, I need to do a polish pass or add some juice here or whatever. Why? Why do I need to do that? Now, there's some times when it's perfectly valid. Perfect example is in Cyberpunk, my stealth hacking roguelike that I'm working on. There's a thing called a threat protocol, and the threat protocol activates when the threat level goes up. And the problem is the threat protocol is in the top right corner, and it's been there for a while. But when it goes up, it does a thing. Like it'll spawn a firewall, it'll spawn an enemy, it'll do a thing. But the game doesn't do a good job of conveying that. And even though in the top right corner, it blinks red and it says some text and it says enemy spawn, right? People miss it. People miss it. And then they come across a new enemy and they're like, how the hell did he get here? It's confusing. And this happens over and over again in playtests. So that's one of those areas where I was right because I thought I needed extra feedback there and I didn't do it. And it was one of my tests of like, is this good enough? Right? If I put it out there, does it serve its functional purpose? And if it does, I don't need to touch it anymore. But sometimes I was wrong, right? People miss it because there's so much going on in their center of the screen that they don't see the top right. And so that's a scenario where, sometimes your test gets wrong and it makes total sense to add some more stuff there, right? And it's validated now. So it's no longer me thinking my perfectionism getting in the way of my shit. It's me being validated by people giving me feedback saying that this thing is not good enough, right? And that's valid. It's just you want to make sure that there's a reason for the things that you think you need to perfect or you think you need to spend more time on, because a lot of the times, matter of fact, I would say 8 times out of 10, you're wrong. You don't need any more stuff there. You need to move on. You need to build the other stuff that you're missing, because that other stuff is going to make a bigger impact. And especially when a commercial game, like, you got to be real here. The whole purpose of a business is to spend more money than it makes. And every hour you spend on your game is money spent, right? So if you don't need to do that, if that's not going to inherently make the game better, if it's not going to bring more value to your game and your players than you're spending, it's not worth it, right? Because you have to think of it like, and if you're not a business, that's okay. You don't have to take that into consideration. You can spend your time on it, but there still doesn't mean that there's not better uses of your time, right? Number 3, this is a big one for me. Being a solo dev, you got to get out of your cave. And the reason why I say that is because perfectionism, especially for me, being an introvert, being an isolated person by default, being somebody that has a cave that I like to stay in, perfectionism can come from the isolation. And especially that hyper focus that I was talking about. Like, some people have this, some people don't. I am so sorry for that sound. Oh no. But if you're prone to something like perfectionism, isolating yourself can make it worse because you're not getting outside feedback. And when you don't get outside feedback, you start to lose clarity. And when you lose clarity on a thing you're working on, you no longer know what's important. And when you no longer know what's important, you can see where I'm going with this. You focus on the wrong things. And if you focus on the wrong things and you have perfectionism, you can go down a major time sink, a major time rabbit hole, spend a bunch of time on something that doesn't matter, and literally just waste your time. Because, like I said, there are diminishing returns after a certain investment of time and money in anything. And if you spend your time well past the diminishing returns point, you are literally like, you could have been building so much cool stuff, right? Like, or stuff that the game needed, right? Like if you're getting feedback, oh, this game isn't fun, and you keep trying to work on the game, the right answer might be to work on the onboarding, to teach people how to use the game, to teach them what's fun about the game. That might be a better option to solve that problem, right? And the problem is, without the clarity that comes from feedback, without outside feedback, without some kind of external stimuli outside of your cave, it's really easy to miss those things because you just end up focusing on what you want. And what you want is not always the most important thing. Or, you know, you misvalue things. You think certain things are important, but when you show it to somebody, they're like, no, this is great. I think you need this, right? So that breaking up that loop can be important, especially if you're solo. If you face your fears and publish imperfect things, I think it becomes less scary and it's freeing. It's just like a skill. So another reason that people tend to isolate, and I mean isolate both in a physical sense, where you are physically staying in a room, not talking to anybody, but I also mean in a mental sense where you aren't sharing of your things. You don't share things with people. You don't show things to people. But I also mean it in a pure game dev sense where you may be social, you may have friends, you may talk to people, but your game, you're hiding it from the world, right? You don't want them to see it yet. It's not perfect. You got to wait till it's perfect. And the reality is, if you're not ashamed of it, there's an old saying from the startup world, if you're not ashamed of it, when you show it, you waited too long. Because so much work can be done on stuff that doesn't matter. And if you show it and you're embarrassed of it, you're going to make sure that the things you're working on are the things that are important to the players, right? Because that's what it's about. It's about people playing your game, right? And honestly, you can tell others about your problem and you can have them hold you accountable. I think accountability is one of the most important things when it comes to actually making a change in your life. And actually, we have a Elite Gold meeting every 2 weeks for our Elite Gold Patreon members, where we meet up and we hold each other accountable. And that's been super helpful for me too, not just for everybody else. And you need that kind of support system. And, you know, maybe you got a partner in game dev. Sorry about that. Maybe you got somebody that you can be accountability buddies with or whatever it is. Perfectionism is one of those things that you got to work on. Just like everything else, right? Like you want to lose weight, you got to put in the work. You want to gain skill at art, you got to put in the work. You want to solve your perfectionism, you got to put in the work, you know, just like anything else. So that being said, this video is brought to you by absolutely nobody, because I don't have any video sponsors, but I do have Patreons and lovely people that support what I do and help me continue to post videos for you guys. So if you'd like to be a part of Patreon and get your name on this shiny little list here, you can do that. Patreon.com/GameDevUnderground. I would love to have you. Lots of cool stuff there. And either way, I appreciate you watching this video. I wish you the best of luck with your perfectionism. I would like you to comment down below. Let me know. Do you have perfectionism? Did you solve it? What are you struggling with? You know, if there's something you're struggling with, we can talk about it as a community. We can figure it out And if there's a way that you overcame your perfectionism, leave that down below too, because maybe there's some solutions that I missed that other people can benefit from, and I would love to hear about them. But that being said, my name is Tim Roswick, and I will see you in the next video.